Now like to introduce our first speaker, who really is a legend, Mr. Kanwal Rekhi. He really needs no introduction. The first Indo-American founder and CEO to take a venture-backed company public on NASDAQ. Father of Thai, much admired in India, an angel investor, advisor to the government of India on the regulatory reforms needed to push venture capital. And I can't resist telling a story that Montek told me about you, Kanwalji, that when Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the Prime Minister, and on one of these official meetings, when he was speaking to you, and he asked how the government can help in really pushing this whole venture capital ahead, you gave a very interesting answer. You had said that governments can never create wealth, Mr. Prime Minister. Even the best of them can probably destroy it slowly. But for generating wealth, you really have to depend on the private sector. So with no further ado, let me bring you to speak on this very important subject.
You know, maybe I should tell the whole story. So I told a Prime Minister, there's an old Indian saying, you know, India was very, very entrepreneurial country in the past. There's an old Indian saying, and you know, jab Raja bane Bipari, to Janta bane Bhikhari. You know, because how can you compete with Raja as a trader or as a business person? And he saw thought for a minute, he says, yeah, that makes lots of sense. And, you know, there were, we have this notion of Andher, Rich Chopat Raja, Tatesir Bhaji, Tatesir Raja, right? You know, price controls and all that. So Prime Minister Vajpayee gave a speech when he became a Prime Minister second time. You know, he was Prime Minister for 13 days, then he was Prime Minister for 13 months, and then became Prime Minister for 5 years, right? Or 4 years. So in that speech, he talked about IT is India's tomorrow. You know, IT industry was just starting to emerge in India, and IT, you know, is India's tomorrow. And I heard that. I said, maybe I should go see this man. And I saw him over half a dozen times. And so when I went to see him, I said, you know, if you think IT is India's tomorrow, then you have to do, you know, a couple of basic things. He says, like what? I said, you need to have a world-class telecom infrastructure. India has a third-rate telecom infrastructure. You can't build a modern IT industry on top of that one. And he says, bataiye kya kare? I mean, he was a man of very few words. And then I told him that you need to also have a venture capital, so there's money available, you know, to support all these entrepreneurs. And then he again said, "Bataiye aur kya kare?" So I took that to mean that, yeah, tell us what to do, right? So I came back to US. At Stanford, we organized 2 groups. You know, I've been engaged with Stanford for the last about 25 years. You know, CPER, which is the Stanford Institute of Economic Policy Research down the road. So I told them we need to advise government of India what they should do about the telecom and venture capital. And Stanford took the challenge, and we spent about 1 year to come up with policy recommendations for India. You know, and lots of people are involved here. We brought people from India, you know, and we studied 13 telecom, deregulations worldwide, see what works, what doesn't work. And so at the end, we came up with the policy recommendations that government of India should not sell the licenses like they were doing before. They should have a revenue share model and not limit how many players can play. Open it up to anybody. Anybody and everybody can have a license free on a revenue share basis, but he must use within a year. You know, within a year, they must start the service, or maybe 18 months. You know, there was some number like that. And if you don't start the license, your license has no value. You cannot sell it, because licenses are freely available. And that, there's a side story I want to tell here before I tell you. But that policy was recommended and implemented. So Ram Vilas Paswan, he was the telecom minister at the time. So he tells me when I went back to present that to him, he says, you're wasting your time. I said, why am I wasting my time? He says, telecom is about national defense imperative. We can't privatize it. I said, you're not a defense minister, you're a telecom minister. Well, you should worry about telecom policies, infrastructure rather than defense policy. And he says, also, this is not our number one problem. I said, what's your number one problem? He says, population. He told me I should spend my energy on population control rather than advise them on the telecom policy. So I said, you're not a health minister, you're not a population minister either. Why are you worried about population? Why don't you worry about telecom? And he told me very quickly, we have no use for your recommendations. And so I wrote an op-ed in Times of India. You can find it on one of my blogs. And it was the headline was DOT Hatao, Desh Bachao. DOT was the Department of Telecom. And I wrote about this thing, how the DOT had become a monopoly, self-serving monopoly. Only 1% of India's population, less than 1% of India's population had the telecom, and they were feeling they had done a superb job. And so that was a pretty sharply written op-ed. And I flew back to India. So I wasted 2 years and $2 million. And this tells me I'm wasting my time and energy. And so I came back to US, and I got a phone call from N.K. Singh, who was the principal secretary to the Prime Minister. He said, Prime Minister, just read your op-ed in the Times of India. He wants to talk to you. I said, well, I'm back in US. He says, he wants to talk to you. Tell him I'm back. He wants to talk to you in person. I says, okay. So I took the flight back. Right away. I went to see him. And so he said, so why did you write that one? I said, well, remember you told me, Bataiye category? He said, I remember that. He says, I spent 2 years, 18 months, we spent money, we came up with the policy recommendations, and your minister tells me that I'm wasting, his time. And he says, okay, sun liya. And then they dismissed me. So I said, you brought me back from US for these 2 minutes. He says, he told you, he heard you, just watch it. And within 2 days, he removed Ram Vilas Paswan as a minister. And he put, what was that guy's name from Maharashtra? No. Pramod Mahajan. He made Pramod Mahajan the Minister of Telecom. And within 2 weeks after that one, they adopted our recommendations, without any change whatsoever. And that was on April Fool's Day in 2001. And so at the day that was happened, there were 1 million mobile phones in India, and there were 17 million landlines in India, in a country of close to, maybe 800, 900 million people at the time. And by the end of that year, the fiscal year following, there were 87, mobile phones in India, and there were 17 million landlines in India still. And you know what has happened. Every year that number almost doubled. So the telecom revolution happened without any debate, any fuss in India. Because Prime Minister thought it was a thing to do. And we spent some time and energy here. And so the notion that India is resistant to change, I think is a nonsense notion. If Prime Minister wants to do it, it gets done. I became very aware of that. So coming back to entrepreneurship, if Guru Nanak was alive, he would be very much at home in Silicon Valley. If you look at the message he gave, right? You forget about the Nam Japo part. That's but Tirth Toro, make an honest living. I think it's time about being an entrepreneur. Make one chateau, share in your good fortune. Start options, wealth creation, wealth distribution. That's what we all, the Silicon Valley is all about, right? When you go back down the Sarvata Palamano, Silicon Valley's total value is win-win, right? You win and I win. Everybody wins. The notion of I win and you lose, that's not the notion in Silicon Valley. So Guru Nanak's message was very much the message of Silicon Valley, his values and the values we have here. So how many of you are entrepreneurs? And how many of you want to be entrepreneurs? All right. So only 2% of the population, eventually succeeds as entrepreneurs. Yeah, just the 2%. But the trouble is that nobody knows which 2% will succeed. The fact that your father was an entrepreneur doesn't mean that you have any better chances of being an entrepreneur than anybody else. Most of the entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley from India didn't have their father in businesses. And now that I do research, the number one profession of the father was the army. Look back at the successful Indian entrepreneurs in the valley. Very often, more often than not, the father was in the army, armed services. Vinod Khosla, go down the list. Sabir Bhatia, my dad. So there was that. Number one was the army, and the number two was being an IAS officer. The government officers. Very few people from the business families became entrepreneurs in the valley here. They do well in India. I guess they don't come here very much. But in the valley, it was the ordinary middle-class Indian who became an entrepreneur and did succeed. So modern entrepreneurship is all about understanding the technology, understanding the economics, and applying the change. By the way, I should tell my I am called first Indian entrepreneur in the valley. There's a qualifier there who took company public on NASDAQ. If you remove the qualifier, Dr. Trapani was the first entrepreneur here in the valley. Dr. Trapani and Dr. Avar Bose of the Bose, they were the original Indian entrepreneurs in the US. And we took a lot of inspiration from them. And by the way, internet wouldn't have been possible without his work anyway. Internet is built upon fiber optics, and he was the father of the fiber optics, right? So what happened here? Most of us arrived in 60s, and especially in my case, 67. And if you remember, 66 was a big famine in India. The U.S. was shipping, this PL480 wheat to India to keep, India alive. And so, so there was this notion, when we got here in 67, India is the third world, third-rate country, can't even feed itself. And, it has to live on our largesse. And, and that message was everywhere. You go to universities, professors will have the same message. And so this professor, the first day he met me, he says, you're from India. Yes, sir. And I think your education is pretty subpar, and probably you'll have trouble keeping up with the students here. And I want to make sure you don't fall behind. And I'm from IIT, and we think we are the best of the best, right? But yes, sir, you're right. He says, if you need any help, call me. And he picks up his telephone. This is the telephone, and he shows me how to dial the telephone. And he said, call me anytime here if you need any help. And a month into the class, he gave us a shotgun quiz. And, shotgun quiz is a surprise test. And I aced it. So he calls me, he says, I want to remind you that we don't cheat in America. And I says, I wasn't cheating. He says, nobody was supposed to ace that test. It was supposed to be, the material hasn't been covered in the class yet. I says, oh, we had done this stuff 2 years ago in IIT. And so next time we gave a shotgun quiz, he stood behind me for a whole hour. And I aced it again. And he said, if you're cheating, you're very good at it. See, that was the mindset that we had to put up with in the 60s. And I think the mindset started to change in 70s. There were enough of IITians came at universities and started to do really well. And by late 70s, they were starting to do really well in the industry. By early 80s, we were ready to make our next move. So I did my startup in 1982 here in the Valley. But there were several of us who were doing simultaneously at the time. Suhash Patil did, CS Logic, Prabhu Doyle did gateway design. And by mid-80s, we were starting to show some results. So 82, when I became an entrepreneur, that was the dawn of the PC, IBM PC. And it was very clear to us that the world is about to change. The PCs, they were mini computers, they were mainframes, and they were all the supercomputers coming up, they will have to internet, and somebody's going to have to do that. And so somebody's going to have to network them. And so that was the idea that we said, we will network them. And I had not been a communication guy. I had not been a networking guy. But I was a basic computer guy. I said, how hard that would be. I went and picked up a simple book within about several days. This stuff is easy stuff. And we designed the earliest Ethernet boards and the software, TCP/IP software. And by 83, 84, we were shipping. Most of the computers were being networked using our stuff. By the time internet happened, you can define when the internet happened, but I put the word internet happened around 95. We had shipped 1 million of those boards, and they became the basis of net internet. Our software, our hardware was connecting all the computers, which formed the internet. So coming back to just notion of 2% of the population, 2% of the arts are very poor arts. Not many people will place a bet on 2% arts. If your chances of winning at 2%, as a rational person, you say, that's a bad bet. But here's the issue. If you lose, you don't lose much. Maybe you have lost 6 months, a year of your life. But if you win, you're set for life. Unlimited upside and very limited downside. When you start to think in those terms, it's a very rational way to become an entrepreneur. And if you fail once, not a problem, get back to the ratio. It's like anything else in life. Your failure is one of the learning experiences. And so if you have one more point. If you take the first step, leave your job and become an entrepreneur, your odds improve overnight tenfold. Because you are now part of a subset, only 10% of the people take that first step. So you have opted into this small pool, which is only 10% of the population takes their first step, and 2% odds in the larger population means 20% odd in this pool. So your odds improve very rapidly, and 6 months, a year later, if it doesn't work 2 or 3 times, you have 60% chances of winning, right? The math is very straightforward. So it's in your favor. The first step is the hardest step, and we don't take the first step because our families tell us not to. How many moms say, "Beta, entrepreneur bano"? The basic message is, "Beta, responsible bano, settle ho jao." You're not a child anymore, right? So there's a strong message to conform and become responsible. So by definition, entrepreneurs are not very responsible people. And so that irresponsibility is required. You have to flout the norm. And indiscipline is required to become an entrepreneur, because if you become the normal person, second job, you'll do well. I don't want to say you will not do well, but you will not be an entrepreneur. Entrepreneur requires somebody who marches to his own tune, who doesn't listen to his mom. I tell people now, you can always ask for forgiveness at the end. And then if you fail, you say, "Well, Mom, I should have listened to you." But if you succeed, your mom will be very proud of you. And so it's something, a journey that you have to do to yourself. It's a very lonely journey. It's a very lonely journey. Lots of hardship per year or two. You have to barrel through that hardship. And nobody can tell you or should tell you to embark on this journey, because it's a lot of self-inflicted pain, requires huge amount of discipline. So you have to have a fire from within. We can tell you what it takes, but we can inspire you to become an entrepreneur, but we never want you to listen to us to become an entrepreneur. If you are listening to somebody else, you will not be able to sustain that fire that you need to succeed. Thank you.